us today to review options for offering school meals to all students at no charge during the 2021-2022 school year. As Nomi said, my name is Alexis Bylander, and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst in the Child Nutrition Department at FRAC. And also with us today is Crystal Fitzsimons, our Director of School and Out-of-School Time Programs. Next. I'm excited to set the stage for today's conversation and then turn it over to our partners at USDA and the Department of Education. Both USDA and DOE can help lay out all the pieces of school nutrition in the year ahead, covering information about the community eligibility provision and the Seamless Summer Option Waiver, along with available methods for collecting data from households. Next. As we all know, the pandemic dramatically changed the landscape for the school meal programs. School nutrition directors and staff have responded in amazing ways to continue getting healthy meals to students, regardless of whether or not they are attending school in person, virtually, or a combination of the two. Ensuring that millions of students have access to school food has been a critical piece of our country's response to the pandemic. Next. A bright spot in the pandemic has been that Congress gave USDA authority to provide waivers to schools so they could serve meals to all students at no cost to households. Across the country, we have seen innovative ways that schools have reached students with school meals. And there are many benefits to offering students free meals during the pandemic and beyond. Recent survey results from the School Nutrition Association show that school meal program directors across the country reported that serving free meals to all students during the pandemic increased access, improved equity, and fueled a large decrease in unpaid school meal debt. Other benefits include ensuring that all students have access to food and are ready to learn, providing nutritious meals to students who live in food-insecure homes but do not qualify for free meals, eliminating the stigma that can sometimes be associated with the school meal program, and easing administrative burdens for school staff. Next, as we think about offering free meals to all students in the year ahead, it provides an opportunity to think about innovative meal service options like breakfast in the classroom, grab-and-go pickup stations, and second-chance breakfast served after first period. Serving meals in classrooms also offers the opportunity to support social distancing, which will continue to be important in the upcoming school year. Next. Now is also a good time to think about applying to be a Medicaid direct certification pilot state. We were thrilled that USDA put out an RFP for Medicaid direct certification, which is the use of Medicaid data files to identify children eligible to receive meals through the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program at free or reduced price without the need for applications. The application deadlines for the pilot projects are on the screen, and I will put a link in the chat for information on USDA's website. And finally, today USDA will be talking about the community eligibility provision. As a companion to that section of the webinar, I wanted to highlight the resources that we have on the FRAC website. We have a grouping tool that allows you to group schools together to increase your identified student percentage and maximize claiming percentages. We also have two financial calculators. One is a break-even calculator that allows you to use your identified student percentage and basic information about your school nutrition operations to calculate the participation needed to break even. The other is a district-level calculator, where you can dig deeper to look at expenses and revenue under CEP by school type and compare implementing community eligibility to your current operations. I will also put a link to our CEP page in the chat so that you can access those tools and everything else related to CEP that we have on the site. Now I'd like to turn it over to Madeline Becker with USDA, and thanks again for joining us today.
Great, thank you so much, Alexis, and good afternoon to everyone on the call. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Madeline Becker, and I work in Child Nutrition Policy at USDA. Today, we will discuss the Seamless Summer Option, or SSO, and how to implement it for school year 2021-2022. Then we'll give a brief overview of the community eligibility provision and tips for currently participating and eligible schools. Finally, we'll provide some information about applications and alternative options for collecting free and reduced price data this school year. Next slide. We understand that some school food authorities, or SFAs, have never used SSO. So before diving in, let's talk about SSO and go over some of its features. SSO is designed to help schools more easily transition from serving school meals to summer meals. It's an option under the National School Lunch Program and is available only to SFA sponsors that serve children during the summer months when school is out. It's important to remember, though, that SFAs can also sponsor non-school sites. SSO combines features of the school lunch program, the school breakfast program, and the summer food service program. For this school year, SSO will fill the special role of eventually helping schools transition from pandemic operations back to normal. Next slide. For school year 2021-2022, USDA issued several waivers that provide schools with the flexibility they need to meet the challenges posed by COVID. Today, we'll talk about two key waivers related to SSO operations this school year. Under the nationwide waiver to allow the Seamless Summer Option, all school food authorities are permitted to serve and claim meals through SSO, regardless of their location. This gives schools the ability to serve free meals to all children, and by not collecting money for meals, schools have maximum flexibility to serve meals in a way that prioritizes health and safety. State agencies are not required to target school or student participation or to qualify sites using area eligibility. All school food authorities and schools may use this waiver. USDA has also increased meal reimbursement rates for schools operating Seamless Summer this school year, recognizing the increased costs of providing safe meals during the pandemic. These two waivers provide administrative flexibility for schools, maximize access for children, and give schools additional financial support to provide high-quality, nutritious meals. Both of the waivers are available for the full duration of the school year. Schools participating in SSO will not be required to return to regular school lunch and breakfast programs at any point during the school year. And lastly, the School Meal Operation, or SMO study, has streamlined waiver reporting requirements for the nationwide waivers. So instead of a separate report, nationwide waiver reporting requirements will be handled through survey questions in the SMO study. Next slide. Allowing schools to operate Seamless Summer helps to promote access and reduce administrative burden associated with eligibility determinations. It also promotes nutritious meals because schools will follow the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program meal patterns, with some targeted flexibility provided through our meal pattern waiver. The school meal patterns emphasize healthy eating with a focus on fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and sensible calorie levels, supporting the administration's overall focus on nutrition security. Schools are not required to participate in Seamless Summer this school year and may choose to participate in the regular school meal programs. However, only schools that operate Seamless Summer will receive the higher reimbursement rates. Next slide. To participate in Seamless Summer, the school food authority must submit an application to its state agency. The application must include the name, address, and phone number for each site, the type of site and documentation to support site eligibility, the name of the organization that will operate the site for the SFA, if applicable, and the types of meals the site will serve, including the days of the week and the times of the day the meals will be served. Next slide. Just like regular school operations, schools must provide public notification regarding the availability of meals and the eligibility criteria at or near the beginning of the school year. Schools participating in Seamless Summer this school year should notify households that all meals will be offered free through the SSO. This will help families plan for and understand what to expect this school year. Next slide. So now I'll transition to a discussion of the Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP. I'll highlight a few important things to keep in mind about CEP during this transition year. We've included a few QR codes on some of the upcoming slides, so you may want to have your phone or tablet handy to scan the codes, as this will allow you to view the resources we mentioned in real time. Next slide. So I'll start by highlighting some of the many benefits of CEP for those of you who might not be familiar with it. In CEP schools, all students have access to free, healthy meals. When all students are served free meals, there's no stigma attached to getting a free meal, so participation tends to increase. There are also benefits for parents and guardians, who don't have to complete household applications or worry about keeping enough money in their school lunch accounts. They simply send their children off to school knowing they'll have the opportunity to eat a breakfast and lunch. By eliminating the school meal application process, CEP also reduces the paperwork burden for schools. And finally, meal service operations can be streamlined under CEP, allowing lunch lines to move faster and providing students more time to eat. So these are just a few of the many benefits of CEP. Next slide. Now we'll discuss CEP elections for school year 2021-2022. Although it may seem odd for schools to elect CEP when the Seamless Summer option is available, we are encouraging schools to take a look at the data to see if now would be a good time to elect CEP or begin a new four-year cycle. Under a waiver USDA released last spring, schools have until September 30th, 2021 to elect CEP using school year 2020-2021 data. This means that local educational agencies and states that elected the waiver have until September 30th to elect CEP for the current school year. LEAs interested in electing CEP should work with their state agency to ensure that they meet the requirements to operate CEP. Even if schools participate in SSO, they would still be considered a CEP school this school year. This applies to schools that are new to CEP as well as schools that are continuing in their four-year cycle. The CEP designation can help students qualify for other benefits, such as pandemic EBT and emergency broadband benefits. Participating in CEP may also ease the transition back to standard program operations for schools and families. Next slide. Now I'll touch on the importance of direct certification and data matching, which are key for schools interested in electing CEP or recalculating their ISP for school year 2022-2023. Direct certification for the current school year began on July 1st, 2021. Non-CEP schools are required to conduct direct certification with SNAP at least 3 times per year, and CEP schools are required to conduct data matching with SNAP at least once per year. However, more frequent matching and expanding matching beyond SNAP can help schools to increase their identified student percentage, or ISP. A higher ISP means an increased federal reimbursement under CEP. LEAs and schools are encouraged to start matching early and to build their ISPs with more frequent matching throughout the year. This will help LEAs plan for electing CEP or establishing a new ISP in the spring. As a reminder, LEAs and schools have the option to recalculate their ISP during the four-year CEP cycle. Using the QR code on the screen, you can visit USDA's Community Eligibility Provision Resource Center to find a fact sheet and webinars with tips for improving your identified student percentage. Next slide, please. Now I will discuss the school meal application and alternative data collection options. Next slide. I'll start by discussing school meal applications for non-CEP schools. Generally, the school meal application is used to determine eligibility for free or reduced price meals at non-CEP schools. By extension, eligibility for school meals is used to determine eligibility for PEBT. LEAs must make school meal applications available as needed to certify children for free or reduced price meals, and that information may be used to qualify newly eligible children for school year 2021-2022 PEBT benefits. So, although free and reduced price applications normally are not required under SSO, LEAs operating SSO would need to make school meal applications available to newly enrolled children, such as kindergartners or transfer students, to qualify them for PEBT benefits. LEAs that collect household applications this year are required to conduct verification, regardless of the reason for the application collection or the child operating. Following my remarks, education about other ways schools can measure school poverty levels without the school meal application. These options can be very useful for schools with incomplete application data due to the USDA waivers, and we encourage LEAs to consider these options for data purposes that are unrelated to school meal or PEBT eligibility. Next slide. schools participating in CEP may not collect school meal applications. This applies regardless of whether the CEP school is operating SSO this year. However, CEP schools may choose to collect alternate income forms to allocate education funding or other benefits to low-income schools or students. School food service staff may process the alternate income forms, but the cost may not be paid from the nonprofit school food service account. That being said, one of the most important advantages of CEP is the potential to substantially reduce administrative paperwork by eliminating the household application process. We encourage LEAs to identify ways to assess school poverty that do not undermine this paperwork reduction benefit. You can find more tips and resources in the Community Eligibility Provision Resource Center. Next slide. USDA recognizes that schools are doing their very best to provide high-quality meals to children during this unprecedented time. We remain focused on doing our part to support state and local efforts to provide safe meals to children. In the past year, we have learned to appreciate the importance of creating a plan and being agile as circumstances continue to evolve. Next slide. While we share the goal to get back to regular meal service operations, we know that there may be a need for schools to continue with socially distant meal service models this school year. Throughout the pandemic, our non-congregate meal service, mealtime flexibility, and parent-guardian pickup waivers have been essential to providing grab-and-go meals. We want to remind schools and other partners of these flexibilities and that they will continue to be available when they are needed for the full duration of the school year. For example, if a school unexpectedly needs to transition to virtual or hybrid learning for a period of time, the school could allow parents and guardians to pick up meals for their children during that time. As schools work towards reopening, we encourage them to create a plan to ensure children continue to have access to meals, even if the learning model needs to change during the school year. We want you to know that USDA remains committed to working with our partners to ensure children have the resources they need to offer meals in the new school year. Next slide. And to that end, we recently published several resources to assist schools with planning for a dynamic school year. You can open the webpage by using the QR code on the bottom right corner of the slide or by typing in the web address you see on the slide. On this webpage, you can find information that shows how schools can use USDA waivers and flexibilities to help with menu planning and meal service this school year. For example, we provide an overview of when a school might need to use a non-congregate feeding and parent pickup waivers compared to when the school should use a regular meal service model. We also have a webpage for procurement and menu planning strategies, which may help to address supply chain issues. Next slide. In addition, Team Nutrition has released a back-to-school resource kit, which you can also access using the QR code or the web address on the slide. This page includes other resources to support a safe reopening, menu planning, and communications with families. USDA remains committed to working together with state agencies, schools, and other partners to provide the information and resources schools need for a successful school year. Next slide. So that concludes my remarks for today, and I will hand it over to our partners at the Department of Education.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Madeline from the USDA, and many thanks to FRAC for the opportunity to be a part of this webinar. We are very excited to talk with you all on some of the connections between the USDA waiver and then programs under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, that are administered by the Department of Education. So we can go to the next slide. In this slide, we discuss a few of those connections, particularly under the ESEA for the Title I Part A, Title II Part A, and the rural and low-income school programs. States and districts have the option to use data from the National School and Program, NSLP, to carry out activities under these programs. Although the use of NSLP data is not the only option of data to use for these programs, we still recognize that most states and school districts do use this data to carry out parts of these programs. So for our presentation, we are going to focus on some of the primary connections between the use of NSLP data and within LEA allocations for Title I. Next slide. So when we refer to within LEA allocations, we're talking about how LEAs determine which of its schools receive Title I funds and the amount that they receive. In doing so, an LEA is required to rank all of its school attendance areas according to their percentage of public school students from low-income families. In order to do this, an LEA needs a poverty count for each school. Under this criteria, to be eligible for Title I funds, a school's percentage of children from low-income families must equal or exceed the LEA's percentage of children from low-income families, or be at 35%. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. We also include some additional information on here of the parameters around within LEA allocations. We can go to the next slide. So looking forward to the 2021-2022 school year, when districts are measuring poverty for the purposes of distributing these Title I funds to schools, there are several options that are available for districts to use. We've included some here, including the NSLP counts, and we've heard from the USDA that can come from data of kids identified through direct certification, or it can also come from household applications. It can come from Medicaid data, it can come from temporary assistance for needy families, TANF data, or any composite of sources that we have listed above. And we can go to the next slide. However, in this slide, we outline the data sources that are available to LEAs in the absence of NSLP household applications, looking into the 2021-2022 school year. So for example, an LEA can choose to use Medicaid data, TANF data, or a composite of data of these two sources that come from the 2020-2021 school year. They also have the option of using any best available NSLP data, and this might come from the 2019-2020 school year, or even be a combination of data from the 2019-2020 or 2020-2021 school years. And then also they have the option to use that NSLP data from the recent school year being 2020-2021, and that can come from direct certification. And we can move to the last slide. So continuing on the options available in the absence of NSLP data, we have that LEAs can use a composite of NSLP, Medicaid, TANF data, which might include Medicaid or TANF counts from the 2020-2021 school year, and then also the best available free and reduced price lunch data, which may also come from 2019-2020 school year. We've also heard a lot of LEAs discuss possibly having a survey that replicates this NSLP data, and that can be an option as well. So I've outlined some of the options on the use of NSLP for within LEA allocations. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to my colleague Todd to touch on a few other areas in which states and school districts sometimes use NSLP data to implement other aspects of ESCA programs.
Thank you, Fatima, for the overview of the data options for within district Title I allocations. As Fatima showed on one of the earlier slides, states and school districts also sometimes, or in some cases often, use data from the National School Lunch Program for several other purposes. And so can go to one of them, which is still at the school district level, is around the process the district uses to determine the amount of Title I funds it must use to provide Title I services to eligible private school children. And this amount is based on the proportion of private school children from low-income families who live in a Title I attendance area of all children, public and private, who live in Title I attendance areas. And this this count of children from private schools, low-income count that districts can determine every year or every other year in that process. So we go to the next slide, please. This slide lists the data sources an LEA may use after getting input from private school officials during consultation. It's pretty likely that if a private school is participating in the school lunch program, and that's how the district that is providing the Title I services to its students distributes its Title I funds to school based on National School Lunch Program data, likely that the district will, after consultation with private school officials, also use national school lunch program data. But it's also possible that the private school may not be participating in the national school lunch program, and in that case, the district may use another source such as survey data or something that it can equate to national school lunch program data to determine that count. You can go to the next slide, please. So kind of in conclusion with the equitable services, under any case that the consultation is happening, there's likely going to be some intersection with national school lunch data, either from private schools directly or private school students directly or equated data. And then for equitable services for the coming school year, those data could be from the 1920 school year, particularly given that they can be used for 2 years in a row. We go to the next slide, please. So Fatima and I have talked so far mostly about ways that districts for Title I purposes use school lunch data. We also mentioned at the beginning that it's not just for Title I that states or districts use school lunch data. It's also for Title II Part A and the Rural and Low-Income Schools program. So this slide focuses on typical uses of these data by state educational agencies, and you'll see that one of them is around basically deriving the equivalent of a census poverty count for school districts, like a charter school district for which census poverty data are not available, as part of determining allocations for those districts. In a nutshell, the ESEA requires a state to derive the equivalent of census poverty data for LEAs where those data aren't available, and they will typically or often use a ratio of school lunch program and census data to derive these counts. These are for allocations, because except for really limited exception, which we'll touch on in the next slide, the national school lunch program data are not used directly or used at all to determine how much funding districts get under these ESEA programs. It's based on census data or derived census data. So for a state that uses national school lunch program data to derive the equivalent of census data, this slide provides options that states have for the 21-22 school year to carry out this process. Go to the next slide, please. In addition to that, there are 10 states that have approval from the U.S. Department of Education to actually use national school lunch program data directly to redistribute the Title I allocations calculated by the U.S. Department of Education for their small LEAs. So that small LEAs is defined in the ESEA as LEAs under 20,000 total population. And basically these states will take what we calculated for their LEAs that are under 20,000 total population, and they use school lunch counts and some other data mixed in to redistribute the total amount we calculated for those districts. So in the end result is some of their districts get, small districts will get less, some will get more, but it doesn't affect how much the state gets in total in Title I funds or the Title I allocations for other districts in the state. And this slide outlines options for states for this coming year that use school lunch program data to do that redistribution among small LEAs. Go to the next slide, please. We put on here a couple resources. The first one is a fact sheet that the U.S. Department of Education released in January that provides options in a bit more detail of the topics we've talked about here today for states and school districts for the coming school year. As has been discussed, the USDA waivers that are in effect through June of 2022 means that some of these same issues covered in the fact sheet for ESEA programs will also be considerations for the 2022-2023 school year. So we are working on an update to that fact sheet to make it more useful to states and school districts as they prepare in the coming months for the 2022-23 school year as well. The second resource is a link to information about within district Title I A allocations that hopefully folks in the audience here and others will find useful, because it talks about just the requirements for distributing the funds, but gets into the different data sources that are used, the options for districts. So as Fatima said as we started out, thank you for the chance to participate in this discussion, and turn it back over to colleagues from FRAC. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, Madeline, Fatima, and Todd. Now we're going to go ahead and answer some questions, and we'll take questions and see if FRAC is able to answer them. And if the questions need to be answered by USDA or the Department of Education, we will keep track of those and follow up with them for answers afterwards. So, Crystal, do you see questions in the chat that you would like to answer? The first one that I see is, if a school is not currently a SFA operator, can they become a site of another school SFA operator?
So Alexis, I would just say for some of these questions, we can definitely follow up with answers to them. And we also, Todd or Fatima, do you think one of you guys could go ahead and put in the links to the guidance? Because for some reason they weren't coming through with the slides, because there was a question about that within the chat as well. But for that question that you're asking, Alexis, we can definitely follow up with people with USDA after the webinar.
For that first question, I actually saw that and I felt, you know, guys, as y'all all know, thank you everyone participating today. This is Angela. I have, when I see questions verbally or whatever, I can't always answer them on the fly, but then I see some in the chat. I'm like, oh, I can handle some of these. And so I just wanted to say, for the first one about being, if you're an operator, you're not participating to be a site operator, the answer is one of those great ones that you love. It depends. So you have to work with your state, but sometimes you can be. So I don't have a great answer on that, but I think that it depends on the situation and that sort of thing. So I kind of can help you there a little bit. Not the best answer, but you know, trying to help. And then I did answer a couple in the chat. The most helpful one I was able to do was on the offer versus serve. I was very proud of that answer. We have a waiver.
So Angela, would you be up for reading the questions that you've already answered?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't mind doing that. There was one about, and there was one I didn't completely understand, so I didn't, and I responded, let's see, and I apologize because I didn't want to, the people that sent the answers in, I wanted to reply to you privately if I didn't understand it, but I couldn't do that. I could just do everyone. But there was a question about offer versus serve and the flexibilities there, you know, when you're doing virtual meals. And I just wanted to remind everyone, we do have a waiver for offer versus serve requirements, and I put it in the chat. So those that aren't aware of it, for high school, which is, I do think that's the only requirement, one that's required to do for lunch. So anyway, take a look at that waiver. That may provide some flexibilities for folks that need it. And I also want to remind people of our wonderful team nutrition materials that provide some best practices and some options there for folks that are looking for some best practices this school year. But for that waiver, I was very impressed with myself. I was able to put that in the chat. And that's good throughout the whole school year.
Yeah, this is Todd. a couple questions we can certainly address. One was about an alternate income form, and don't really have any new information on that than what we've shared for some years, particularly since CEP has come out, that certainly for Title I purposes, if a district chooses to, it's going to have the direct certificate. District is using school lunch data and to distribute funds to schools and wants to use, it'll have the direct certification counts, but can certainly for Title I purposes, if it chooses to or has a reason to, based on, to come up with what it feels is the most accurate measure of school poverty for its schools, it could use a survey that replicates the school lunch household application to get the information it needs for Title I purposes, making it clear that the district is doing that on its own, not saying that it's really required by the federal government, either certainly not by us, because there's plenty of other ways you can do within district Title I allocations besides using household applications. And we've talked about some of that today with just using direct certification data, direct cert adjusted by 1.6, or using Medicaid or TANF data or a combination. But you can certainly, if the district does feel like that's going to yield the most accurate poverty count, it can do that as long as it's just clear it's doing it for, not doing it because it's required to by Ed or USDA. One other question was around the use of data from the 1920 school year for the within district allocations in 2021, and we've said since January or even sooner, more informally, that it is fine as far as we're concerned to use the best available data, which could be from the 1920 school year for within district allocations.
Great, thanks, Todd. Todd or Fatima, do you see any other questions in the chat that you want to answer now?
So as an example, what schools have used as an alternative survey for Title I data, I think we've, as Fatima outlined, the statute gives districts the choices of using, Medicaid data, TANF data, or other forms of National School Lunch Program like direct certification, or a survey that replicates any of those sources. So I think, the Title I program, as folks know, is administered at the district level, and then within the state by the state educational agency. So we don't necessarily see the forms, but what we think when we say a form that replicates that is you would get, the district would be getting that similar information to count students from low-income families that it would if it was doing household applications. And, expect just getting the minimal information needed, just like you would be very similar to the household application, except you're using it for just Title I purposes. And it's not labeled for the school meals program. So that's what I would say on that.
All right.
Fatima, what would you add?
Correct. No, thank you, Todd. You definitely hit that on the mark. I don't have anything to add.
All right. Well, thanks for answering those questions, Todd. Angela, I want to go back to you before we wrap up just one more time to see if there's anything else that you've read that you want to respond to.
I'm just taking a look at these. I don't see any more. There's one question about alternative forms that are non-CEP schools. and I just don't have enough facts from the situation to fully understand. And I did a follow-up. So if someone wants to follow up here or in the FRAC, is school that's offering SSO this year? I mean, or you know, this answer, it just depends. I mean, generally, I think maybe you could, but I just, you know, I think the good part of the question was that you cannot collect applications if you're doing CEP. So I think someone has the right frame there. But if someone does want to do an alternative form, I just kind of wanted to know a little bit more. So, because sometimes with these general questions, you just want to make sure that you're giving the right answer there. So I was trying to prod a little bit to get a little bit more facts in the case. So once again, I have one of those sort of general maybe answers, and depends on what's going on there. But there is no required application that we use by the federal government. You know, we don't have to use our form per se. Just wanted to make that point, but I didn't have all the facts to answer that. So I did see it. And that's the only other one I really saw for us. I see a question about that was kind of a tweener about the data for, there was another one I really couldn't answer. So I think that's, hold on. So here's one. How does Meal for All students help sites that operate CACFP at risk? So that is a question. Oh, and that was, okay, now someone just followed up about that. So I have two things here. So for at risk, that is, you know, I think what you could say is the meal, you know, that is a separate program, but at risk, we did waive area eligibility. So I think that is a good thing this school year. So while it's not, Meals for All is for SSO, waiving the area, my understanding is that area eligibility was waived this year for CSP at risk. I hope I'm not mingling my waivers. So that is actually providing access for that program as well. Maddie, let me know if I got that wrong, because my waivers start to, at some point, gel in my brain. But we actually are working, one of our goals is to work on our website to make sure that all of our programs and all of our waivers are a little bit more understandable, and that you can go make sure that it's a little bit more clear about what's available for each program. So I think it's a fair question, but we're trying to have as many flexibilities as possible. And I also saw a question there about if someone's participating in SSO. So you're asking maybe to have an alternative form to have information, probably for information to get, so someone can have AP exams or other types of questions, other types of information. So I think as long as it's not equivalent, it's not for a USDA, it's not a USDA form, I think you can collect that information. It just can't really be, you know, I mean, I think that's probably fine. And we have information on our website about alternative forms. It just really, I think that's what that question's about. See, I'm not great on the spot with these questions. I told you, I warned you, I warned you.
Yeah.
So yeah, so and you know, but I'm really excited that people are doing SSO and that are taking advantage of the waivers. Yeah, purely for LEA. Wouldn't it be great if we were able to all like have it back and forth? So purely, but yeah, I think that's acceptable. I mean, that's what I you know, but let me, hopefully that's helpful. And I need to go back and double check, but I think that's stuff that seems pretty complex. As long as it's not saying that it's being used for our programs, I think that you can collect information, you know, as long as the parents consent. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Quite frankly, we've been out of the application business for a little bit, so I'm a little rusty.
Yeah, and one thing I would just jump in and add about the CACFP at risk, one thing that's special about CACFP at risk is that that program can operate on the weekends and holidays. So we published a question and answer document earlier this summer, and I can drop a link to that in the chat as well. And that kind of talks about how CACFP at risk can be used in those other situations when Seamless Summer can't be serving meals. So.
Thank you, Maddie. That's really helpful. Saving me.
Great. Well, I just want to thank Angela and Madeline from USDA and Fatima and Todd from the Department of Education for being panelists today, and for everyone joining today and asking good questions. To wrap up all of this information, we'll send out a follow-up email to everyone who joined today with a link to today's recording and also links to some of the resources that were put in the chat. So thanks again for joining, and good luck as you prepare or have started the upcoming school year. So enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.